Good evening and welcome to the Half Moon Bay Planning Commission, July 9th, 2019. Start with Pledge of Allegiance.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And roll call.
Yes. Commissioner Hernandez.
I am present.
Commissioner Polgar. Here. Commissioner Reddick. Vice Chair Benjamin.
Still here.
And Chair Holt.
Here.
All 5 planning commissioners are present this evening.
Okay, moving on to the approval of minutes. We have 2 minutes from July 25th and July 11th. I'll note I was absent along with Commissioner Hernandez for June 25th, so we'll need to recuse ourselves. Otherwise, do I have a motion for the June 25th minutes?
I move we approve those minutes.
A second?
I'll second.
Can I just make one note? We need to amend the minutes to have whoever was the chair of the meeting to be the signature on the minutes.
Thank you. Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, and minutes for meeting of June 11th, 2019. Is there a motion to approve?
I make a motion to approve.
Second?
I'll second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. Moving into the public comment period. This is the period of the meeting for public comment on items not on the agenda. If you wish to make a public comment, you need to fill out a green card. I don't have any green cards, so I'm not seeing anybody jumping up to the podium. I'm going to close the public comment period, and we'll move on to our first public hearing item. Item 1A, an application for a coastal development permit at 4000 Cabrillo Highway North. And that is Brittany.
Good evening, commissioners. Staff is very excited to be here to bring you the Pillar Point RV Park After the Fact CDP and new public restroom. No? Okay, I'll go with this. Sorry, give us 1 second. Is that not working? I did. Yeah. Sorry, technical difficulties.
See, I told you, Jill, you jinxed us.
Oh, there it goes. Okay. Yeah, I can connection work. Okay. Okay. Okay, so an overview of the item in front of you. I will go through the project presentation. We will bring it back to the Planning Commission for any clarifying questions, then a public comment period, and then back to you for a Planning Commission discussion. So the project site is 4000 Cabrillo Highway North, the Pillar Point RV Park. It is located between Surfers Beach and the Beach House Hotel on the northern end of the city limits. It is next to a segment of the Coastal Trail and Highway 1 and is a very popular visitor-serving coastal recreation and access area. The site has been historically used as a beach parking lot, as you can see in these historic aerials from 1972 and 1979. You can also see the existing restroom has been constructed by 1972, predating the Coastal Act. This project has a long background, but to go through it quickly, the site is owned by the San Mateo County Harbor District, who obtained a use permit to operate the site as an RV park in 1977, 84, 86, and again in 87. The use permit approved improvements for the RV park, including paving, landscaping, fencing, restrooms, and trash collection areas. The site was then leased to KN Properties LLC in 1998, with a lease term that expires in 2023 and an option to extend for an additional 25 years to 2048. The lessee, per the lease terms, made the improvements that were approved under the use permit from the city. At that time, it was determined that the use permit from 1987 was still valid, but that the improvements never were approved under a coastal development permit. Here are a couple photos of the existing restroom that you saw was constructed prior to 1972. After the site was improved to function as an RV park, the restroom was really hidden from public view by the RV lots, as it is located on the interior of the site, and it is not readily visible or accessible to the public. So the Harbor District and Kane Properties and the city have been coordinating, recognizing the fact that the site is in need of a public restroom, and to approve the after-the-fact development of the existing RV park. So this project before you tonight is somewhat two-part: the after-the-fact CDP for the existing RV park and associated improvements, for which the Harbor District and Kane Properties are co-applicants, and the new development of the public restroom facility with the associated amenities. There are a number of them, and I will go through them in a couple slides, but this new development requires a CDP, an architectural review, and a setback variance, and the Harbor District is the lead applicant for this new development portion of the project and is responsible for design, construction, operation, and maintenance of the restroom facility. Since the CDP application last January 2018, there have been a number of opportunities for public input and outreach, including a Planning Commission study session January of this year and a recent Harbor District Board meeting. Both were well attended. The recent Harbor District Board meeting addressed the plans that you're seeing tonight. They were very well supported by the public. And the city has been working with the Harbor District on seeking grant funding, including the Priority Conservation Area Grant, which is due very soon. So as the project does require a setback variance and it is located within a visual resource area, story poles have been put up. Okay, so here is the proposed conceptual site plan. The site plan shows how the proposed restroom and associated improvements have been sited and designed in consideration of the pedestrian, bicycle, and vehicular access and circulation. It's set back from the trail to allow space to gather and for a line of sight coming around that coastal trail curve, yet will be easily visible and accessible from the trail and the nearby beach. The proposed parking lot reconfiguration will result in 8 ADA parking spaces with an ADA path of travel to the trail and restrooms. The existing $10 day use fee is proposed to be eliminated for the new ADA parking spaces. Here's a close-up of the site plan showing where the parking lot reconfiguration accommodates a trail retreat of approximately 10 to 20 feet inland, with the existing alignment shown here in the dash lines where the red arrow is pointing to, and the proposed new alignment in solid where the blue arrow is pointing to. The new trail alignment will include additional benches and a landscaped area between the parking spaces. The restroom structure will include 3 all-gender accessible restroom stalls, benches, water fountains, an outdoor shower, informational and educational signage, and a covered roof for weather protection with skylights. As proposed, the structure is 14.5 feet tall from the trail level, with board-formed concrete walls and a standing seam metal roof. The site is located in proximity to dune scrub habitat. The image here is from our draft LUP habitat maps. The dune scrub habitat is shown in tan, and the nearby marine environment shown in blue. but the site itself does not contain any sensitive habitat. The historic aerials shown earlier indicate that the RV park was developed entirely within a disturbed footprint, as is the proposed restroom development. The site was graded and improved with drainage features to capture stormwater runoff, as you can see in these photos. However, as the site was developed without a CDP, staff proposes several conditions of approval to ensure site runoff is not causing water quality impacts, including a final grading and drainage plan for the proposed restroom site, a stormwater treatment plan with low-impact development implementation measures for the entire site, and a site inspection to identify any pollutant discharge sources that may need remediation. As I previously noted, the site is a major public access and recreation area, and the project's intent is to enhance the coastal access and recreation experience at this segment of the coast. The restroom will provide a much-needed facility and amendments, and the RV park itself is a lower-cost visitor-serving accommodation that supports coastal recreation. The site currently contains 21 standard parking stalls and 2 ADA parking stalls for a total of 23 day-use parking spaces. As proposed, the 21 parking stalls will be reconfigured with 6 additional ADA stalls for a total of 8 ADA parking spaces and an overall loss of 15 parking spaces. Although the proposal represents this overall loss of 15 public parking spaces, ample parking opportunities are located within walking distance of the site and within walking distance of Surfers Beach. And these parking areas shown in red here are not as accommodating to folks who need more accessible spaces. The dirt lot across the street has challenging grade changes. It is not easy to cross the highway there and or to park on the side of the road. The locations shown on the bottom left there are about a half-mile north of the site. They do provide several ADA parking spaces, but there's no dedicated ADA parking area that is this close to the shoreline and the coastal trail within city limits up and down the coast. So the addition of ADA spaces at the subject site is fully supportive of the Coastal Commission's recent environmental justice policy document, which encourages maximizing coastal access for all, and it provides a really unique location along the Half Moon Bay coast where individuals with accessibility needs can get very close to the shoreline without these significant grade changes. To mitigate for some loss of public parking spaces, staff is recommending a condition of approval requiring a final site plan that includes a maximum of 40 RV spaces, which is consistent with the lease agreement, a minimum of 8 standard parking stalls with a minimum of 1 EV charger that would serve 2 of the standard parking spaces, a minimum of 7 ADA parking stalls with a minimum of 1 van pickup and drop-off space that it's intended to serve surf schools and other coastal recreation groups such as that. We also included a provision for a bicycle rack. With regards to coastal hazards, the restroom has been cited to be safest from sea level rise and to take advantage of the sewer and water lines that run along the highway so that new utility lines are not introduced near the shoreline. The proposal also retreats the trail and parking areas away from flood and wave run-up hazards. As the restroom is within 100 feet of the shoreline, a geological report is required as a condition of approval. Staff does not anticipate any concerns based on the size and location of the structure, but notes that any major changes necessitated by the report will require a permit amendment. This is a flood map from Our Coast, Our Future showing a 5.7 foot projection of sea level rise, which is over the National Research Council's highest projection range for the year 2100, with a 100-year storm scenario. And you can see that the proposed restroom location is still safe from these sea level rise projections with the existing revetment. Similarly, another flood map from FEMA showing the proposed location outside of the flood zone. It does cover the segment of the coastal trail and a minor area of the parking lot that is proposed to be retreated further inland. So the site is considered a visual resource area as it is within 200 yards of Highway 1 and provides broad ocean views. The restroom has been cited to be least impactful from these ocean views, from as viewed from Highway 1 and from the trail by tucking it at the bottom of the grade change from the trail level up to the highway. It's approximately a 10-foot difference. With the maximum building height proposed at 14.5 feet, that 4.5-foot difference would be visible from the highway, but we are including landscape screening and fencing screening as a condition of approval, as well as a condition for a maximum height of 14.5 feet. Conditions of approval also require a non-reflective roof material to avoid any glare from sun or ocean. And here are a couple of photos. It's a bit faint with the fog, but you can see the yellow tape of the story poles up. And the difference between the existing fence and the story pole height, as well as the existing landscape screening. So the location of the proposed restroom was chosen very carefully to avoid these visual impacts, but does necessitate a setback variance. The CVS, Commercial Visitor Serving Zone, requires a 20-foot front yard setback, and we are considering the Highway 1 frontage, the front yard here. The restroom would be approximately 10 feet away from the front property line, but it is located purposefully to be protective of visual resources, and staff believes that any further away to comply with that 20-foot front yard setback would be more impactful. So there is existing landscape screening along the entire Highway 1 frontage, as was required by the original use permit, as well as the lease agreement. And that was intended to screen the RV. This is also a provision of our municipal code in the visual resources section. However, the landscape screening has outgrown its purpose to screen just the RVs and has obstructed blue ocean views. So staff is recommending a condition of approval for replacing the existing fencing and landscaping at a more appropriate height with more appropriate coastal species. This is also a very visible gateway site into the city, and a palette that's more consistent with the city's median landscaping would be branding of the city. More visual resources related to signage. The existing signage for the business contains a monument sign as pictured here, several flags, to one of the nation, one of the state, which are exempt from our sign code, and several directional signs, which are also exempt. The proposed educational and wayfinding signage is also exempt from the sign code. So with the property's very long business frontage, the existing signage related to the business itself is compliant with the city's sign code, and we did include a note that we would want to see a sign program for any additional business signage, as well as the final copy of the educational and wayfinding signage before installation. So for environmental review for the after-the-fact development, CEQA case law provides that the baseline for evaluating a project's potential environmental impacts is the environmental conditions at the time of the analysis, even if the site contains unpermitted development. The unpermitted development in this case occurred within a previously disturbed footprint, as we see from these historic images, and the proposed development is not causing any significant change to the site condition. So staff has found the proposed development categorically exempt under several exemption categories, and notes that conditions still may be imposed through the CDP under the Coastal Act, although the project is not found to cause any significant environmental impact. So since the staff report was published last Wednesday, staff has received several comments and questions from the public and from commissioners that have led to several changes in staff's recommendations. I'm going to go through those quickly. They're also in the 2 memos that you have received, and there are copies available at the front for anyone who hasn't read them yet. Related to landscaping, we are going to recommend that you include additional landscape screening along the western border of the RV site. As you can see in this photo here, it is a very stark contrast between the natural western side of the trail and the fronts of the RVs there. Also, this is a requirement of our municipal code and was discussed in the staff report, but just to clarify in the condition language that all new landscaping shall be established within 5 years. And finally, a review of the final landscape and fencing heights for compliance with site distance requirements from the Highway 1 access drive for vehicles pulling in and out of the project site. Related to parking, staff recommends revising the language for the EV charging spaces such that a time limit would be tied to the charging power of the EV station, so providing the Harbor District with a little more flexibility there. Related to trash and signage, we recommend revising the final plan's condition to add a requirement for waste bins, including pet waste stations. This is something that the Harbor District has vocalized their intent to do. It is not called out on the site key of the site plan, so we just want to make that explicit in the final plan's condition. We would also want to confirm with the solid waste service provider that compost bins would be available. There are 2 different service providers in the area, and we want to make sure that is a possibility. We also would recommend providing information on the proposed waste practices on the bins themselves or on additional proposed signage. Related to water quality, staff recommends clarification that any remediation identified by the site inspection report is actually implemented. And related to coastal hazards, a clarification, as we noted, that any major changes necessitated by the geological report would require a major permit amendment. And finally, a new condition related to sea level rise triggers. We did note this in the staff report, and I apologize, it did not get caught in the resolution. So you can find the findings and discussion around this this condition language, as well as the condition language itself in the memo. For further discussion, staff recommends a couple things that came up as during the public comments that we've received since last week. Further related to landscaping, there is a single cypress tree, as you can see in the bottom left, located next to the proposed restroom site that a member of the public has suggested keeping. It does have a nice natural form and interesting character, but it is more obstructive of ocean views than landscape screening may need to be. There's also a row of cypress trees on the northern border of the subject site between the RV park and the beach house, and that was suggested to be included in the landscaping removal. We are unsure whose property the trees exactly land on. We would recommend clarifying that first before considering their removal. And it may be possible that their view impacts could be mitigated through pruning and maintenance rather than removal. A comment came up regarding car share spaces, recommendation that the one of the standard vehicle spaces be dedicated to a car share. A lot of the RV users come in with their large RVs and they aren't able to get around the city and further explore without just going within walking distance. It is a very interesting idea and is something we would love to explore more citywide, but we would recommend at this, for this particular project to have the applicant consider outreaching to car share companies first and determine the feasibility of doing this. Okay, for overnight stay limits for the RV patrons, staff originally recommended a 30-day maximum consecutive stay. This is generally consistent with statewide practices of making a distinction between shorter-term lodging and longer-term housing. And the RV park website advertises a 28-day maximum stay with a 24-hour vacancy turnaround, so you can't return within 24 hours. And the lease agreement does not specify any overnight stay limitation. And the Coastal Commission has made several relevant approvals in recent years that are noted in your memo, and I'm happy to go through those again if anyone would like to hear them. Staff did find that the San Mateo County Harbor District's ordinance includes a overnight stay limitation for this specific Pillar Point RV park that states that no vehicle shall be allowed to stay overnight for more than 14 consecutive days or more than 30 days in any one calendar year. Staff would recommend considering consistency with this code, as well as potential exceptions for fishermen during major fishing seasons, exceptions for the permanent on-site manager who could potentially monitor tenancy and length of stays, as well as a one-year monitoring period to give us the ability to reassess the overnight stay limitations and any impacts they're causing to coastal access and recreation. Oh, that is a duplicate slide, sorry. So in conclusion, the project is in conformance with the city's local coastal program with the conditions of approval. The setback variance is supportable as it allows maximum protection of visual resources. And the conditions of approval require construction level details and programming, drainage improvements, replacement landscape screening, additional vehicle parking spaces, and more. Staff recommends approval of PDP 18006, and the staff is available for any additional questions.
Thank you very much for a very thorough report. We'll bring it back to the commission for clarifying questions at this time. I'll just note if there's any members of the public who wish to comment, please fill out a green speaker card in the back. I, at this point, do not have any speaker cards, so just a note there. So are there any clarifying questions? Commissioner Benjamin.
Well, actually, I just wanted to report ex parte communication. So I had two conversations on this item that I want to be sure are recorded. The first was with Harbor District board member Sabrina Brennan. She spoke as a private citizen, and I also spoke briefly with Mr. Nearhand from KN Properties earlier this evening. The focus of both conversations was the somewhat unorthodox nature of the applicant, because they have different responsibilities, and they all seemed very comfortable with that. But I thought it was important for that to be reflected in our dialogue. I also, Ms. Brennan also indicated that in her experience, it was unusual for fishermen to use the RV parking area. She felt that they had other, we'll call them informal accommodations elsewhere. And so I want to be sure that the record reflects that input, since it's pertinent to my decision. Thank you.
Commissioner Hernandez.
Brittany, thank you for the report. Appreciate the Harbor District's application, and this looks like a genuine improvement to the area. Some very thoughtful things have gone into this. Just a clarifying question, I think you've already said this. The RV park is not long-term housing, correct?
Correct. The Harbor District does have the code that you just saw here. The lease agreement does not specify, but I believe this code is specific to the Pillar Point RV Park.
And does the Harbor District have any objections to us making the condition of approval consistent with the San Mateo County limits?
Not that we're aware of. A board member is here tonight.
Okay, we can let the board member speak when they come up. That was my only question. Thank you.
Commissioner Reddick?
Sorry, I'm trying to. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Brittany. The scope of this is very ambitious, and I know that you've worked hard with the applicants in this. A couple of questions. Does the conceptual site map you showed, if I'm right, that is conceptual and doesn't serve today to show details about specific parking spaces and where RV spaces versus ADA spaces would be located, or does it?
Well, the site plan is conceptual, you're correct, but it does, it is scaled and it is accurate to the amount of spaces that are there on site currently, as well, the RV spaces, excuse me, as well as the proposed, there we go, as well as the proposed ADA spaces.
And the ADA spaces in this plan are at the right extreme, is that correct?
Correct.
And where would the non-ADA regular day use parking places be?
I did, yeah, if I could go forward. So staff has a recommendation, but did want to provide the Harbor District with flexibility in their final plans. Let me see if I can find, there we go. The longer green rectangle is where staff found it would be most appropriate to replace the existing RV spaces with standard parking stalls, and the smaller square next to the restroom structure there, and maybe an appropriate place for that van pickup and drop-off space. We did want to provide the Harbor District with that flexibility for their final plans, however.
Well, that makes sense. And lastly, on the possible exemption for fishermen from the overnight stay limits, did I read correctly that you were thinking of commercial fishermen only?
I believe that's what the memo says. We could certainly discuss other user groups, and the idea was to support the priority coastal recreation use.
And were the discussion of potential changes to overnight stays, did staff have it in mind that this would apply to only this RV park or to all the current and possibly future RV parks in the city?
At this time, we can only address the Pillar Point RV Park as the CDP is in front of us for review, and we could do a statewide policy at the policy level through our land use plan update or a zoning code update.
Thank you.
Commissioner Polgar, any questions from you at this time?
No, actually, my question was very similar to Commissioner Ruddock, so thank you for asking that.
So, Commissioner Benjamin.
Right. Remind me if I'm not in the microphone enough. So a couple of questions. First, with respect to the cypress trees and the challenge of its managing the competing alternatives of letting nature flow and protecting the view, is it the city's impression, or after talking with arborists or with your own expertise, considerable expertise, that pruning that tree could achieve a healthy vegetative result while keeping it low? Or is that, am I calling for an opinion that you don't have or prefer not to offer?
I'm going to chime in just a little bit. The individual who brought this to our attention was really focused on maintaining a cypress tree that had its natural form. They're hard to keep in check in terms of size and maintain a nice habit about them. So we would be concerned about always having to fight against the tree, wanting to do what it's supposed to be doing, which is growing. And they're really hard to turn into hedges, and that is what I think staff is saying we really didn't want to see with the existing trees. So it's a tough one, that one on the corner, and we didn't know if people had a specific affinity for that. We know that you see it coming around that curve. You're used to this the scape of what you're looking at as you come towards Surf Beach, and it's important view to everyone. And we would expect that folks have different opinions about it. We think it can be kept, but it will get big, and otherwise it could be replaced with something else that we would really work hard on having it be coastal and lower and have an ultimate maturity size that is manageable, and you wouldn't have to be fighting it.
And also I wanted to make sure I understood what it could be conflicting goals, one of which was to keep the vegetation low and the other was to get it established within 5 years. A species that grows in a hurry and achieves screening goals in 5 years is likely to get a lot bigger. Do you feel that these are mutually exclusive goals, or is there a plant palette that will work to help us achieve both?
We think the fence could help to that point. We could do some sort of vine species that would cover the fence, that was at an appropriate height, say a maximum of 7 feet, as we've recommended in the conditions of approval, with lower shrubs in front of the fence that would help add to the landscaping.
Okay. Other visual, the signs that were indicated on the map, there was a location for them, the little number 3 in the scripted picture. I think it was that one. You can't really see it too well, but in the upper right-hand corner, I think there's a little 3 there. I wanted to be sure I understood that those signs were subordinate to the character of the site. What I've noticed in state parks, for example, at the Venice Beach area and some other areas, they've added some very discrete signs that let, if you're looking for wayfinding, you can see that characteristic dark brown with bright yellow painted letters pressed into the wood. And they don't dominate the view. By contrast, on Kelly Avenue, the city wanted to let people know where to park. So there's a kind of a billboard level, 6 foot, I don't know, it's a rather large sign that tells people where to go. And I just want to get a vision in your conceptual diagram as to the relationship of the size of the sign and its location to the site. Can you advise?
Yes, so the signs you're referring to are labeled number 3. There are 2 places for them. They're on each of these wing walls on each side of the proposed restroom structure. We have included a condition of approval that they be no higher than 3 feet for that exact reason. We do not want them to contribute or cause any visual impacts.
Okay, so I'm not supposed to react, but I'm smiling. Last question before we get into public hearing. Thank you for your comments. There was one policy that I was sort of having trouble interpreting. I'm thinking I may not be the only commissioner, and that was policy 2-12 Part D. And I wonder if, now that we're all together and we could get a map on the wall, you could sort of help me understand how what it is about the design that's conforming with that. I'm not questioning it. I guess I'm not completely sure that I understand it.
So this response was included in your second memo that you received today. I believe it is 4 questions in. And you are referring to the east parking area that our land use plan policy calls out for this Harbor District owned property. We are, let me see if I can find a good site plan while we're talking. I do in the, so the, this area of our half moon is really more of a east-west orientation, as you can see here. So what we consider this policy to refer to when it says eastern is the subject site itself, as there are more western properties as are circled in red in the picture in the lower left.
I'd like to add a little bit more to that, because that reference to the eastern property of the Harbor District's properties, that's the one they have in the city limits. So our LCP would not really necessarily be addressing these other ones.
Okay, when I see that picture, it all comes together with those comments. Thank you. No additional questions at this time.
Great, thank you. Just a couple quick questions. I apologize if I'm re-asking questions just in a different way. So the city of Half Moon Bay, we don't have necessarily a code or restriction on limits of RV parking or limits of stay currently. Is that correct?
That's correct. So what we've been referring out to is state law, where there's really that 30-day, under 30 days, it's lodging, versus over 30, it's residential use. So that's.
And have we imposed conditions, length of stay conditions on past RV parks that have been approved?
I believe that we have on a more recent one, but I would need to look at that. I don't know about the older Pelican Point RV Park. But within your purview for a coastal development permit, and specifically reviewing the use, really new, because the baseline for this is thinking of this as a new proposed use. You can really focus on its compatibility with a commercial visitor serving zoning designation and being a visitor serving use.
Right, and okay. And just curious if you looked into what the stay limit is at Half Moon Bay State Beach at the campground there? I think it's 7 days. 7 days consecutively, and I think there's a limit. Okay. And then I know this is outside the city, but there's other areas in the Harbor District area where commercial fishermen currently are able to stay. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. I think that's all my questions for now, so I'll go ahead and open up the public hearing. And the first speaker I have is John Olam.
John Olam, thanks for having me up here. This looks like a pretty creative and impressive plan that's been put together.
Is the microphone on? Is your solid green?
This looks like a really impressive plan. Looks like a lot of work has gone into it. It looks like Mr. Nearhan is giving up quite a bit to make this work in relation to the amount of space he's using right now. The fact you're putting in ADA space is really, adds a lot. For every ADA space you create, I think is worth 10 slots, of others parking, because the rest of us can walk. So I think that's a really good move on that part. The only real concern I have is that it seems like when I was at the Harbor District meeting that a lot of the timing of this is going to be predicated on the funding that is obtained. And the funding, I believe, was obtained of like 1/3 has been identified, but I'm not sure that it's anything past that. And I'd sure hate to see this, be held up for 5 years while people are looking for somebody else to pay for it. And so this is a community thing. It's pretty rare that I would get up here and say that this is like why we have a community, this is why we have a city, this is why we have, employees like this, is to solve these kind of community issues and to come through in a way that's as fair as possible. And I think that they've come just about as close as you can. So I'm hoping you will approve this. Thanks.
Great, thank you very much. Second speaker we have is Mike Wallace. Sure, your microphone on there. He's got to be solid green. Just push the button, make sure it stays on.
And you may just need to be very close to it as well.
Are we on?
We're on.
Hello.
I apologize. We have people, I'm sure half of Half Moon Bay is watching us on TV now.
I actually represent one of the groups that are power users of the parking in that area. Surfers and fishermen are some of the frequent visitors there. And my concern is that, this is actually a huge net loss of public parking outside of the commendable ADA designations there. We've had kids crossing the highway for years, and that's been an issue for us. I know parents come in and will drop off their kids in that area. So I would encourage you, to make sure if there are 8 spaces given back from the RV lot, that's maximized for the public that would normally use that area. And also possibly consider some better signage, safety signage on the highway. This is something we've been asking for years, even if that means some sort of surfer crossing signs, fisherman crossing signs. There've been a number of really, really close calls in that area. And I would also suggest there's a photo in there of the dirt lot across the street showing 2 cars occupying that lot. And that's a really big misrepresentation of what goes on around there. I think most of you who drive by regularly know. In fact, today there are probably 30 or 40 cars there, and another 20 to 30 lined up all along the highway because we had a nice swell running. So, it really depends what's going on down there. So that's my concern, and I know there's a lot of overflow parking from the RV areas. The contractors who come and stay in that area, I've been informed by the management there, particularly in the evenings after they're finished working, wherever they're working, they park their large trucks, in those parking spaces. So that's being also used. The day use lot is also being used by the residents in the RV lot. So that's something else to consider at any given time, because that also reduces the public access to that lot. But I would like to really commend the commission on the upgrades in this area, even the temporary bathrooms that have gone in over the 4th of July have been fully utilized in a period of 2 days. So there is a definite public need for this space, and the upgrades are wonderful. So keep up the good work. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And the last speaker card I have is for Edmundo Lorenas.
Good evening, everyone, commissioners, staff, and members of the public. I have to say that, as you all have been saying, a lot of work went into this, and you could go back maybe 18, 20 years where the public has not had public bathrooms accessible to them there. I, for one, am very excited to see this happen. And I'd just like to point out that this process has been long, but there have been a lot of public agencies involved. Staff's done a great job. Our interim general manager, John Moran, has worked with staff, and it's been a great relationship. Coastal Commission has been involved, the California Coastal Conservancy. And I would characterize this as one of the few projects where everyone involved has been working to try to make it work instead of putting barriers in front of it. So we're very happy that this is happening, and the concern that Mike just expressed and John, about traffic, that's a community problem. The dirt lot's actually all run by the Granada Community Services District. We will try to work with them to move parking problems ahead. I mean, the district does have some other parking areas, so we'll keep working with everyone to resolve those issues, but just getting this done is fantastic. And we're very happy to see that everyone agrees with the concept of adding more ADA parking, because it's very badly needed in this area. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
With that, that's the last speaker card I have, so I think I'm going to close the public comment period. If you could just stay available, and if we do have any questions, we'll be sure to get back to you. So is there any other speakers? Jump now or forever hold your peace. We're going to close the public comment period, bring it back to commissioner discussion. I did have one other question that I forgot to ask, which is a more clarifying question, but are there going to be any general hours that the bathrooms would be open, or are they going to be 24 hours?
The interim general manager of the Harbor District has indicated that they would lock the restrooms overnight, as they do their other public restrooms.
So I'm just curious what time the other public restrooms opened, and surfing is often a early morning sort of activity.
That's a good question. We can absolutely clarify.
Okay. So commissioners.
I noticed there's a lot of, just a follow-up question back to city staff. You're going to have clear signage indicating there's restrooms here, correct? I didn't quite see that called out, but I just want to make sure that some thoughts put into that as people are walking along the path. It's dead obvious that there's a bathroom here. The showers kind of point that out, but anyway, just hoping for an affirmative answer there.
Yes, there is proposed signage. We have included in the conditions of approval that we review the proposed copy of that signage before it is installed, and that would be our opportunity to make sure that's abundantly clear.
Thank you.
Okay, other commissioner comments, and I'll just remind the commission there were some specific questions that staff had regarding the cypress trees and looking for input on some of the landscaping and that type of thing. So if we can get that together too.
Actually, before I do have some thoughts on that, but before that, I wanted to reference there was a comment about the timing and it being predicated of these improvements, and they're being predicated on funding. And my understanding is that the funding was for the new development, the restrooms. And so it makes sense that would require separate funding and all. But my understanding about the after the fact permit, CDP, is that those are not predicated on some sort of funding. Those the conditions that are put into this would be required immediately, or depending on if there was a specific timeline in for a condition. Is that correct?
That is correct. We did try to make that distinction of the conditions that are applicable to the entire site as the after the fact CDP, especially making the connection with the conditions, the improvements that were required by the use permit, such as the landscaping, fencing, lighting, and grading and drainage. So they are separate, correct, from the new restroom.
And Commissioner, through the chair, I just also want to note in the grant application to the, it's HMBPC, a Priority Conservation Area grant, is the one that we're collaborating right now with the Harbor District, although there well may be others. None of the after the fact, the existing use, the conditions associated with it, none of that is part of the application for public funding to support this site. It's all about the new part.
Okay. Well, I guess I'll just go first on sort of general comments. I'm absolutely going to support this. I think staff's done a great job in working with it, and it's come a long way from when it came here during the study session. And I definitely appreciate the thorough presentation, sort of hitting on each of the different issues that I've seen discussed around in the community. The cypress trees on the north property, I think, I like the idea of pruning and maintaining those, and obviously finding out, whose property they are on. But would be a little bit leery of sort of recommending wholesale removal of those. I'm not necessarily wedded to the cypress tree in the parking lot near the proposed bathroom. I would recommend, and not that we need to put a condition on hours of operation, but that may be something for the Harbor District to consider, and with input from Half Moon Bay Surf Club and the other surfing group. They would know best in terms of when that would be best that they could open up, obviously within their operating constraints. Otherwise, I think it's a great project. In terms of length of stay, I know I looked into my agency's policies on camping stays. Ours have a 15-day stay limit. You has to have a gap of 2 days in between, and then no more than 30 days within a year. Or within 2 years, actually. So that's kind of what I was looking at. But it sounds like looking at the existing code that San Mateo Harbor District already has for this area sounds pretty similar and pretty reasonable to me. So I guess I would just ask that that be enforced. And so with that, and including that here, I'm happy to approve the project.
Through the chair. Thank you. This was also a remarkable moment. Like the Stolosky project, this project represents an opportunity for us to resolve some difficulties that we inherited. And I want to commend staff again, just like they did yeoman's work on the Stolosky project, for getting the, working to create more light than heat, and helping us find a way forward, surfacing the key questions, and getting alignment between agencies. This represents an incredible amount of work behind the scenes to bring this forward. And the agencies and the applicants and the cooperating agencies are to be commended as well. So thanks to all of you for that. With respect to the trees, I am in agreement that as much as I love cypress trees, I am concerned about the impact to the broad ocean view that would be available if it were not there. That is what our local, it's not my subjective view, that's the way the local coastal program reads. And I hope that we can find vegetation that will soften the built structure. I, for one, would be content to use a fence or something else for screening if there must be screening, while vegetation grows up to the point that it's achieving the height goal. If that means that we get a vegetated, plants whose asymptotic height is not going to be, 50 feet high. There is also a safety concern with cypresses. They can be quite large, and this area doesn't necessarily support a huge root structure. So I think it's appropriate for us to remove that tree and go with something smaller, something that provides a denser cover. I'm more agnostic with respect to what's on the north side of the property, or I guess that's the west side, adjacent to the Harbor Hotel, the beach house, thank you. I think that that's a relatively large structure, and you're close enough to it that the impact in terms of broad ocean views is limited. So I await the opinion of my colleagues. I would have said the same thing that the chair said with respect to 30 days a year being sufficient. This is an incredibly valuable but very scarce facility, and I think presenting it as something that someone could monopolize for a longer period of time seems unkind to the majority who may not be able to plan. So I also like the 30 days over the year model. To the extent that it's designed to support coastal recreation And I would distinguish that from coastal-dependent industrial uses such as fishing. As much as I value and I respect and I support the goal of professional fishermen in the area, I don't think this is the appropriate resource for them to use for housing. I believe the Harbor District has a vested interest in their mission in supporting those people. And I hope that as the maturity of the Harbor District's land use evolves, that some of the uses that may be informal, come under careful review. We might see better facilities that they could take advantage of. With respect to Mr. Wallace's comment, thank you for that. I think that it would be a great idea to provide more vehicle parking on the Harbor District land, acknowledging that that's outside of the city limits, and so we're not here to say, we're not empowered to say that's where it needs to be. But I would like to see that. We have one EV post, so that would serve 2 cars. I think there's a great demand for electric vehicle parking in the future, and that might be another feature to consider in the Harbor District's plan for providing additional parking to support the uses there. So I will toss that out, not so much a condition on this project, but as a suggestion that I hope will be well received by the district. With respect to parking, Mr. Wallace and others have mentioned that it's difficult to get across Highway 1. It's not part of this project, but perhaps we should be having another look at our local coastal program, Coastal Access Chapter, to see whether we are responding to that potential accident waiting to happen by investigating the possibility of a crossing in that area that, part of it is not in the city, so we can't do the whole thing. But since we were able to get good collaboration here, maybe lightning can strike twice in the same place. With respect to the business signage, I was very happy with what you were describing on the signs, and I'm comfortable with how you interpreted policy 2-12D. Thank you very much for presenting that. I think that's all I have for right now. I will be supporting this project. Thank you.
Commissioner Reddick?
Thank you. Yeah, I think one of the best things about this project is the focus on adding the ADA parking spaces to this, and I applaud the applicants and the staff for focusing on that. The staff report makes a pretty compelling case for the fact that this may be in all the city limits the best place for us to invest in greater ADA access to that, and that makes sense. It's a painful trade-off, though, as Mr. Wallace commented, that we give up as many day use spaces as it sounds like we are. If my arithmetic is about right, I think that's about a loss of 13 day use spaces.
As the city is recommending the conditions of approval with the minimum of 7 ADA, minimum of 1 van, and minimum of 8 standard vehicle parking spaces, that's a overall loss of 7 parking spaces from the existing 23.
Yeah, and I understand the logic of it. And in a sense, it is true that there is ample parking nearby, within a half mile of there, if we include some of the other Harbor District parking resources. I'm very much in favor of seeing if we can generate some multi-jurisdictional energy to build a crosswalk to make slightly less hairy the prospect of parking in that vacant lot and dashing across Highway 1 with all your stuff and your kids and such and your dog. The mayor's indicating maybe an overpass someday. That would be ideal. On the subject of the overnight stays, it seems to me now that it would be odd if the city, if we were to require some kind of policy there that is different from what the Harbor District apparently already has in place.
We would recommend being consistent with the Harbor District's code.
Yeah, and I always start with these questions with the idea of fairness in mind, and if we are going to begin putting RV overnight stay limits in place, I'd like to see us do that for all the properties in the city, and unless there are very special mitigating factors about this particular property where it should be different. But anyway, that's given the existence of this Harbor District code, that's probably outside the scope of this. But if and when we do deal with the question of RV policies, I'd like to see us start with the viewpoint of something that works for all such properties in the city. On the question of the cypress trees, I think what Commissioner Benjamin points out about some of the disadvantages and risks of the one to be near the new restroom site, I agree with that. That row of cypress on the north edge of the property, I don't know. One would have to look at it before getting very excited about a course of action. My hope would be that we would tread lightly there and maybe manage that lightly, and rather than start with the default position of ripping them all out. Thank you.
Commissioner Hernandez?
Thank you. So as somebody who has 6 cypress trees on his property, I can speak to the fact that these things grow fast and they are expensive to maintain. So I would give city staff wide latitude in pruning them and maintaining them. I do think the screening of the vehicles from the path, so as you're on the western side of the RVs, I do think it's important that we put some kind of screening, fencing, vegetation, whatever, so that we don't have to look at the cars when we're there. I think I agree with the staff's recommendation that we take some action there. I think it's an important thing to do. And I also support amending Exhibit B8 on the amount of time that people stay there, consistent with the Harbor District's code. I like the annual limit. That's actually really helpful. It's not housing. It's designed for visitor serving recreational purposes, especially for short-term purposes. I would love to see us look at the signage near the property and what we can do to help with either pedestrian access or just getting cars to slow down through signage there. It is a dangerous intersection. I know a pedestrian died not too long ago in front of Sam's Chowder House. So, whatever we can do there from a staff perspective, signage, crosswalks or whatever, or overpass or tunnel. There's a lot of attention that can be paid there. So I'm in favor of all that. So otherwise, I fully support this project. I think it's a good improvement. You've done a lot of work to make this widely acceptable to the public. So thank you.
Great. Commissioner Polgar?
Thank you very much for this. It was really wonderful work, and I also appreciated the detail of the presentation to really help me understand some key things. And my comments echo my fellow commissioners. I think that I'm not tremendously excited about the single cypress, and I don't know that it necessarily needs to stay. In terms of the north, or I can't tell if it's the west side or the north side, but I gather it's the row of cypress that are between the, adjoining the next property. So I wouldn't necessarily go ahead and get rid of those. I think maintaining them, is fine. The one thing in terms of using a fence in the time that it takes the vegetation to grow, I'm not a huge fan of fences because they do have a feel of like you're not allowed in a sense, which is a weird sentiment to have in an area where you have views and coastal public access. So it's just fences always have that feeling of you're not allowed here, and so I don't have anything to back that up other than my experience, but I have worked a lot in kind of coastal public access in that field. So that's the only caution I would say. I mean, understand if it's going to take a while for some of that vegetation to grow, and you're going to be basically looking at, the RVs. Maybe there's a trade-off there that's worth it. I'm very supportive of this Harbor District 14-day limit with a 30-day in one calendar year. And I appreciate Commissioner Benjamin's comment about the purpose of this RV serving this recreational value. And I do think that is different than the commercial fishermen. And so I would, especially since it sounds like there's other locations within the Harbor District that would serve the needs of commercial fishermen, I would rather see this remain for the recreational users. So that's, those are basically my comments. I want to thank staff for addressing my concerns about trash. I think that I think that's actually really, really important. I just stopped by and to see, get the feel of with the story poles and everything, and talk to a couple people who were out there, and they did mention, you couldn't see a trash can anywhere from the spot, and it had just been July 4th, and it had been kind of a mess, and stuff. And I think this is also not just important for serving, having trash, I would say recycling and compost and the pet waste. I think that all four of those are very important. I think it's an important, it's a spot where an education, it can be really valuable. It's a key spot. People are then heading along the coastal trail towards the Fitzgerald Marine Reserve, or they're heading south towards our beaches. And I think that this is a key spot where you can help them understand the importance of packing it out and give them the resources to dispose of their trash properly, and and so it's so important. It's such a massive issue for our coastal, our beaches right now. And I will say the pet waste is a huge issue for our water quality right now. And I don't think a lot of people are aware of how devastating pet waste is for water quality, in particular, just north of this area. So very supportive, and really appreciate that being added into as one of the conditions. I know it was already in the works, but just having it be explicit, I think I'm really pleased about. And those are my comments.
Great, thank you very much. And Commissioner Benjamin, round two.
Right. Thank you. Through the chair, I am absolutely not wed to having a fence. I think that there are, low shrub vegetations that work in places. I've seen something that looks sort of like juniper near the sand plant that provides a low screen up to a certain point. Whether that could survive in the Solitaire right at the Strand, I have no idea. But there are people who know this stuff better than I ever could. But just to clarify, I wasn't meaning to suggest that we needed a fence in the interest of immediate screening. It just, because there was pressure in the language to say it should be established in 5 years, I perhaps wrongly inferred that someone wanted that screening now, but I'm not that person. So I'm quite content if other commissioners are content to wait. I'm very good at delaying emotional gratification. There were a couple of other items on the list of discussion items. I think the exception for the on-site manager is okay. I think if that adds a lot of value for people who are not oriented to the area, that seems quite reasonable to me. The one-year monitoring, I think, is also fine to, in general, I think we should be seeing these as living documents. So it's not so much that there's something special about this one that means we should, be holding a magnifying glass to it to see what it looks like a year from now. We should be able to adapt continuously to the circumstances. And let's see, was there anything else on the list that we had not spoken to? Like Commissioner Polgar, I appreciate staff's infinite patience with my questions. This is a learning process for your planning commission as much as it is for your staff. We encountered a lot of new information on this project. It was the first time I had ever heard that after-the-fact CEQA project should be judged by the condition after the unpermitted use. That just floors me. In fact, it still floors me. But I'm grateful that we live in the coastal zone where we can attach coastal development permit conditions to address mitigations that are addressing impacts of pre-development, notwithstanding CEQA. So that's very comforting. If the rest of it is crazy, that isn't. So thanks again for all of that. I think if we could, in a perfect world, it would have been nice to have the geologic report in hand. I think that the risks are low enough, and the code, unlike biological reports, the geologic report is not absolutely, it doesn't absolutely have to come before we consider it. So I was initially a little tense about that, but with staff's guidance, I got to relax. So thank you for your forbearance on that and so many other issues. That's it for me, except for a motion when you want it.
Okay, so before I entertain a motion, just one quick question. So I thought it was a really good comment that was made, I think he left, Mr. Wallace, about some of the public parking spaces being utilized for parking of the folks who are actually staying in the RV park and not being available to the general public. Can we condition this or restrict it in some way to have those parking spaces only available to, like, say, folks, to the public, and say, trying to avoid somebody who's, say, hauling a Jeep behind their RV and parking it into that parking spot or something along those lines?
Staff has already included language in that condition you're referring to, allowing the Harbor District to have a little flexibility on proposing time limits that could be applied to the standard vehicle parking
Got you.
spaces, and I believe
Time
that would
limits.
encourage the turnover you're looking
Okay.
for.
Time limits, yeah, okay. Okay, thank you very much. So with that, Jill.
We just wanted to make a couple more notes to make sure they are on your mind. Back to the fence. The reason why we started from the perspective of a fence is there is a fence there now, and at a minimum, we think it needs to be replaced or removed and replaced with landscaping. And so it seemed that the path of quickest coverage, because it's going to surprise people if that fence comes down. It's chain link with slats. It's very old, and we think you could have something nicer at this point in time. So it doesn't have to be a fence. Think about how you'd like the condition to be worded. We can work with anything. We're going to need a good landscape architect to work with. So just consider that. And if we have the ability to maybe have a fence north of the driveway, which is where the RVs are, that could be more helpful. South of the driveway, there is a fence there now as well. I'm not sure that you really need one south of the driveway. That's where the restroom is proposed, and you will see the roof of the restroom, which is why we're adamant about non-reflective materials in any type of lighting. You probably saw that emphasized in your conditions. The other one is the idea for parking, because the yield of parking spaces for public use is reduced a bit. The intent was to have the highest diversity possible for parking that would supplement or be in addition to what's already out and about. And one of the things that we wanted to make sure you saw was the idea that, I know Brittany brought up the car share in her presentation. We have a soft condition about it, and we just want to make sure that you're okay including that. We didn't think it should be a demand because car share or some, some of those different companies might not see that it's ripe to be in this location, and that would be an onerous condition for them. Because you're about to complete this, we do want to note a couple other things about the collaboration and the outreach. Brittany was incredibly thorough on her presentation, but we just want to be clear on public notice for this item. The attendance at those other two meetings was very good. This item was noticed through the newspaper multiple times for the board districts meeting. We did a lot of notification for this. The story polls, of course, get everybody's attention. I was pulled off the sidewalk a few times from people who were so excited about this project, and grateful for the restrooms, which is why you see the condition about it being okay to have those restrooms, the portable restrooms there for now. And we might want to add something about trash and recycling on a short-term basis as well until the permanent materials can come forward. But the outreach was really great, and you're not seeing a really full room because I think a lot of people know about it. They've been talking about it. We've seen it blogged about. We've been meeting with individuals, and we know that you have as well. But collaborating with the Harbor District staff and the board members, the Coastal Commission, as well as the Coastal Conservancy, and then our own staff team here, this has been really satisfying to hopefully pull together. We are committed to the cause to help this get implemented. We know that sometimes a great project doesn't get finished, and we're worried about that too, and we just want you to know that. Okay, thank you.
Great, thank you very much. So with that, I'm ready to entertain a motion.
I'd like to make a motion to adopt a resolution to approve PDP 18006, an application for a coastal development permit, architectural review, and setback variance at 4000 Cabrillo Highway, with a condition to maximize public access to day use parking and diversity of use. I think it's what the city's recommended. Give the city latitude to come up with a landscaping plan consistent with the feedback they've received from the Planning Commission, and a condition of approval to Exhibit B, Item 8, making use consistent with the San Mateo County Harbor District's limits.
Do we have a second?
Second, and a couple of suggestions just to make sure we've vacuumed everything up that we heard. One was encouraging the ride share.
That was the diversity of
Oh,
use.
okay, I didn't know what it meant, sorry. And there was also the okay for the 1 year, or sorry, for the monitor to remain, the exception that's suggested in the,
I think,
the camp host.
Yep.
Okay, and then there was the questions about screening vegetation, replacing the tree. I guess that those were.
I'd give the city latitude to figure that out.
So so the question to staff then is a seconder, do you have the direction that you need in order to have clarity of staff's intent?
This is what we heard. The northwest property line that we're trying to decide if it's north or west, we think it's northwest. We would have that area just cleaned up, maintained, and not remove the cypress trees, and we actually would recommend that. The tree by the driveway, we will look for something better over the long term and anticipate that it would be okay with you for that to be replaced. And the landscaping need along the western side between the edge of the RVs going down slope to the trail, you would like to see enhanced landscaping in that area. Obviously, the landscaping is not going to be as tall as the RVs, but it should provide some nice comfortable screening between being on a bike or walking along the trail and the RV above. So those were what we heard. Yeah, okay.
Did you need additional clarification on the fence or I mean, I don't have, I feel like that there should be the staff should have latitude.
Only if you have a strong opinion about it. Okay.
Okay, then that was the only concerns I had, just to be sure we had it on the table.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Okay, approved. So we can move on to our next item, item 1B, application for a coastal development permit. A very quick break. We're going to break for just 5 minutes.
That was an easy hearing.
All right, Jill, you ready to get back? Okay, we're going to open up the Planning Commission meeting back, and on to our next item for, we'll take it over to Scott for coastal development permit architectural review for 543 Filbert.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the Planning Commission. This project involves a new residence and accessory dwelling unit at 543 Filbert. And the subject property took on its current form back in 1955 when the state of California purchased a portion of the property to allow for the construction of Cabrillo Highway. Then in 1982, the city abandoned the adjacent alleyway on the north side of the property, and it was somehow made into a separate parcel. In August of 2018, the current application was submitted to the city. It did remain incomplete for a little while the owners acquired the former alleyway. Once that took place, then the project was deemed complete, and we moved forward with scheduling tonight's public hearing. The project itself consists of the construction of a new 2-story residence and attached accessory dwelling unit totaling 2,253 square feet. And you can kind of see it here in this photograph. The footprint itself has been pushed back roughly 30 feet back from the front property line, which is about 10 feet more than the minimum required of 20 feet. And you can see the adjacent property or the adjacent home here that's at the 20-foot mark. Permits requested, as mentioned, include a coastal development permit and architectural review. As far as noticing for those permits, the site was posted. We published a legal notice in the Half Moon Bay Review, and notices were sent out to all the property owners within 300 feet and the occupants within 100 feet. The site itself is located on the northeast corner of Filbert Street and Cabrillo Highway in a developed neighborhood, zone R2. Includes 2 parcels, which I tried to identify here in green. You can see the former alleyway there. Single family is a principally permitted use in the R2 zoning district. And here is the site plan in gray, showing the, or in gray is the proposed building footprint. And notice that the new driveway, since the footprint has been pushed back a ways, it provides for additional space that where you can back out of the driveway, and it eliminates the need to back out onto Filbert, providing for a more safe situation. Let's see. Here's the grading and drainage plan, and they've included several dry wells to retain the stormwater on site. And then landscape plan. Commission may have noticed that there are several trees that have been planted on the site already. Additional landscaping indicated on the landscape plan will be planted as well in conformance with our model water efficiency ordinance. As As far as the floor plans go, we've got this first floor on the right, second floor on the left, and the single family actually occupies both floors and includes 3 bedrooms and 2.5 baths. The attached accessory dwelling unit is, with the exception of the stairs accessing it, is on the second floor and includes 1 bedroom, 1 bath, and a den. Here's the front elevation facing south, Filbert. Let's see, exterior materials include horizontal hardy plank siding, cedar fascia, and composition shingles. A decorative trellis was also added along above the garage here. And you'll notice that dark sky light fixtures have also been placed in key spots along the new building. As far as the accessory dwelling unit goes, they have included a balcony on the second story that's neatly integrated into the design of the house. And here's the street-facing side elevation facing Cabrillo Highway to facing west. Columns and a covered porch have been included to emphasize the front entryway to the main residence. And here's the interior side elevation. This includes the main entrance to the accessory dwelling unit. Here's the north elevation facing the backyard. Notice several sliding glass doors, which allows for opening up of the main space in the residence to the sort of the indoor-outdoor space. And here's one of the, let's see, the rendering, southwest rendering. And northwest rendering, also showing the various sliding glass doors. And then here's the photo simulation. Some of the key items for the Commission to consider include conformance with the local coastal program, our residential design guidelines, and conformance with CEQA. Let's see. As far as the development standards, as mentioned earlier, we do have several parcels associated with the subject property, so a lot merger will be required. Once the individual parcels are merged, the house, as proposed tonight, would conform to the zoning regulations for the R2 zoning district. Similarly, the visual resource standards have been acknowledged in the findings and for approval, and a memorandum was distributed to the Planning Commission to provide feedback on Highway 1 as a visual resource area. And you may have noticed that story poles were also installed in conformance with our story pole policy, which requires the installation of story poles when a project is within a visual resource area. Additionally, at the end of my presentation, Sarah would like to give a couple more words on the Highway 1 as a visual resource area. And just as an example, here's an older duplex that's just a block to the north in similar proximity to the highway. Several of our design guidelines were taken into consideration when designing this project, including Guideline 3.2, specifying architectural elements such as projections, dormers, and entryways, windows and decks to be sized at an appropriate scale with the home. We feel that the project as proposed does substantially conform to that particular guideline, as well as Guideline 2-6, which talks about stepping back the second story, providing articulation on every side of the new residence. Also, the overall height has been limited to less than what's normally required, or the maximum allowed in the R2 zoning district. And then, as I mentioned earlier, Guideline 3-36 calls out dark sky light fixtures which they've also integrated into the project. As far as CEQA, the project preliminary determination is that it's categorically exempt from CEQA. We're recommending approval, and one item that did come up as far as, and in relation to the proximity to the highway, that there is a tendency to have, some additional highway noise on the subject property. There are provisions within the building code that, require sound attenuation. But a question came up about if it would be possible to add construction methods to increase the sound attenuation. So we can certainly add a condition of approval requiring, increased sound attenuation in conformance with our noise element. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions. I think Sarah wanted to go into a little bit more about visual resource area.
Yes, thanks, Scott. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the visual resource standards that we are applying in the Highway 1 corridor. As some of you will recall, we talked about this about a month ago with respect to the 555 Poplar project. And I wanted to take an opportunity to explain the little bit of shift that we've had from staff's recommendation perspective about how we consider visual resources in the Highway 1 corridor. So staff is recommending that for this project and moving forward, that we treat the 200 yards within Highway 1 as a visual resource area. And this is a bit of a shift from in the past. Both the LCP and the Chapter 18.37 talk about protecting the area within the Highway 1 corridor, but sort of defer that process until such areas are designated on the visual resource overlay map, something that has never happened. And so this is what we've intended to do here is looking at the LCP and the implementation plan. We believe that there is an intent to protect this area as a visual resource area. And so moving forward, both with respect to this project and others that may fall within that 200-yard corridor, we will be treating this as a visual resource area and evaluating project conformity with the standards accordingly. This then turns to the question of the standards that staff recommends we apply here. And we're recommending application of section 18.37.030B, which is under the category of scenic corridor standards. As you'll see in the memo that was distributed tonight, this section has 5 factors for the commission to evaluate in understanding whether a project is sufficiently protective of visual resources within that corridor. And in particular, I wanted to draw your attention to the last item, subsection 5, which talks about ensuring that projects are designed to maintain a low height above natural grade unless a greater height would not obstruct public views. And as we discussed with respect to the 555 Poplar project, this provision specifically refers to public views, and those public views can include views of the inland hillside. And so this is the standard in which staff is recommending the Planning Commission consider whether or not a project obstructs views of those inland hillsides. You'll see in the proposed findings for this project that we talk about whether a view is fleeting or not, whether it is short-term in nature, and believe that you can make the findings based on those types of qualifications with respect to the project and its view of the inland hillsides. So that's how we've recommended approaching it with respect to this project and how we recommend approaching visual resources within the Highway 1 corridor moving forward. But I'm happy to answer any further questions on this topic that might come up tonight.
Other than the visual thank you, this is a great staff report. Appreciate the project and welcome the applicant and their family here. Other than the visual resource question, is there any reason why this is coming before us as opposed to just going to the Community Development Director for ministerial approval?
Well, part of it is that it is a unique site so close to the highway. And that's the primary reason.
So there's no variance or anything like
No.
that? Okay, very good.
Well, thank you, Sarah. I'll just note, I took a look at the project. I live kind of in this neighborhood. This is my street that I kind of drive down, so I've seen the story poles up for quite a bit. And as I took a look at it today, I couldn't see any visual resources. It was so foggy, I'm not sure if there's something you can do about that.
We'll try and regulate
I guess
that.
that's true. Commissioner Benjamin.
A couple of questions. So first, just to clarify, I may not have phrased my question with respect to sound sufficiently. I appreciate the idea of describing the, encouraging certain construction techniques with respect to sound. But let me try to be clear. Half Moon Bay has an adopted noise element in its adopted general plan. And it says that we have certain limits in a table that say how loud it can be outside of a residence and inside a residence. And the rules, and of course, this isn't impulse, this is, C and EL, it's, there's a formula for it, but it says for a single family or a duplex, the interior should be no more than 40 decibel, and the exterior should be no more than 60. That's not difficult at a lot of sites. Adjacent to the highway, it may require extra effort. I'm not saying it's unachievable, but I think it's important because it's a standard and we need to own it. And so it should be a condition to achieve this standard. That's what I was indicating. With respect to questions, on Scott, if you could put up the view as it faces the neighbor to the east. That one. So yeah, quite a few windows on the upper deck in the back. This building is recessed relative to the other neighbors, and I'm without prescription. I wonder if you have any concerns about privacy, whether you think half windows might be appropriate resolution, or the nature of the buildings there or the vegetation in the area make it moot.
So, I think the best thing to do would be to get the architect to weigh in on any potential privacy impacts by the second-story windows.
Okay, and let's see, I guess we should, I assume that one of the reasons it was set back so far was to maximize the sight lines, is that right?
Well, the primary reason was to conform to the maximum building envelope.
Yes,
So-
okay, but we get good sight lines as a benefit. We're not going to have a potentially nice sight line and then fence it away, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. So.
Okay, I'll hold my other questions or comments until after. Thank you.
Okay, any other quick questions of staff, clarifying questions? So maybe we could hear from the project architect, and then I can open up for the public hearing. And if you could answer just Commissioner Benjamin's questions regarding privacy and the east-facing windows.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm Chris Ridgway. I'm the architect on the project, and I'd like to introduce you to my marvelous clients. This is Fidel and Maria and their 2 daughters, and they have another one on the way. So I better hurry up and get this designed and built. The lot is challenging. I'm trying. I have to, somewhere between not at all and way too loud. So, okay, thank you for telling me. The lot tapers from its narrowest at the front, and then it tapers to be wider at the back. And so it makes an interesting challenge design-wise how to accommodate that. And obviously, we kind of stair-step the design when you look at the floor plan, which would be on A2.1 if you want to look there. And so that's a reality of trying to get the house to fit on this unusual lot. But we really try to take it to our advantage that if we're going to do this, could we take this long facade and break it up with the jogs there's going to be in it. And then also, you'll see the architecture kind of reflects those stair steps in and out with the gable roofs that kind of face the side. So we took something that was kind of dictated by the site and tried to turn it into an advantage. You recently saw another property that was very similar to this, was on Highway 1 in Poplar. And I want to point out, because it's inevitable they get compared, and there is a lot of things that are very similar about this location and the size of the lot. Poplar has a huge amount of traffic because that's where the light is, and that's where the pedestrian access is across. And obviously, we don't have that problem on Filbert. But we did feel like it was important that we'd be able to turn the cars around and head out into Filbert rather than backing into a dangerous area there. So that is different. We're not asking for any exceptions. They asked for an exception to the daylight plane and a parking variance, which we're not asking for. We do have an accessory dwelling unit, as they did too. It's 544 square feet, and there was a lot of conversation last time about providing extra housing stock, and that would help the low-income market. So I think we all agree that that's a good idea. It's nice that even though the lot is small, we're still underneath the floor area maximum by 122 square feet. So we haven't maxed out the lot. So one of the primary things when you look at the design, and maybe Scott, you can turn to that perspective you had from the northwest corner. Let's keep on going. Let's see if we can find it, that one there. So you can see that the second floor is set back from the first floor. And we didn't really want to have these tall, sheer two-story walls from first story to second story. And so the roof really breaks it up. The temptation as an architect is to try to be underneath the height limit, is to try to go to a low-pitched roof. And I didn't really want to do that, because what happens is when you go to a low-pitched roof, then as you walk up to the building, soon you don't see the roof at all, you just see the underside of the eaves. And now you have a really tall building with what appears to be a flat roof. And so we have an 8 and 12 roof pitch on both the top and the bottom. But in spite of that, we're 3.5 feet underneath the height limit. So the question is, how did I do it? Magic, yeah, believe me, trust me. So part of the idea of setting back the second story, as I've already mentioned, is to get that roof line that breaks it up, but it also makes the wing of the house much less wide. And so when you're putting a roof on a wing that isn't very wide, the roof can't raise up very high because it soon hits the other one quickly. And so that really reduced the mass of the roof. The other thing is we went with some ridiculously low plate heights. If you look on the section A4.1, you'll see that we have a 5'8" plate height on the wall that faces the east toward the neighbor. And what we wanted to do is really keep the roof down, and we did it also on the backside too. And the way we compensated for this is that we made cathedral ceilings. And so the cathedral ceilings will come down low, 5'8" here, but then they will go up high. And I really love those spaces that you come kind of are both lofty and intimate. And so that's the way we achieved it. It is more expensive by far to do a cathedral ceiling, and so it's nice to work with Fidel, who's in construction, and that he could do it and do it at a reasonable price. And so, but the temptation often is you see these low-pitched roof houses with automatic roof trusses, and they, they brag that they're lower, but they've done it at the expense of the whole aesthetic of the building. So it's really nice that we can 3D model the building, and we can look at it from any angle, and then we can really study how these things work. The noise, something I was very concerned about, and I was going to address a lot of these in working drawings because they're details that, but I'm glad it's been brought up. So, of course, there's a lot of noise from Highway 1, and we're concerned about it for both my client and their children. So the weakest point of a building is always the windows. And so what type of windows we use? Well, we use double pane glass, which is what typically is used now. Both panes, the panes do help cut down the noise transmission, but on the outside pane, we were going to use a laminated glass. And that's what they use at the airport, and what it does is by putting a piece of plastic sandwiched in between two pieces of glass, it changes the frequency vibration of what the glass and the plastic is. And so the sound doesn't get transmitted that well through it, and then it has to vibrate the air, and then vibrate the interior window, and so it really cuts down greatly on the noise through the glass. The next thing you have to look at is the walls, and one of the ways to block noise is really to put a lot of mass involved. And so if something's very heavy, the sound waves can't vibrate it. So we have hardy plank siding on the sides of the house, and that's made with cement and wood, so it's heavy, and then plywood on the outside. And then it's not noted on the plans, but we're going to double up the sheetrock on the inside. So now we have both mass on the outside and mass on the inside to really mitigate the noise going through. I can tell you these things because I've worked with acoustic engineers before. I would really, right now, my clients have to pay for myself and a structural engineer and a civil engineer and energy calcs. If you demanded we try to quantify this, then we'd have to hire an acoustic consultant to really go through this and do the numbers and do the math. And I'd hope that it's just gotten awfully expensive. So I'd hope that you wouldn't require that. But I think these are very good measures, and I think they're intuitive, obviously, to help. There's a couple other things that I wanted to do for the noise. On the outside, obviously, we can't block the noise of the road. But often if you put a fountain in and you can hear the noise of the falling water, it helps mask the noise of the road. And I would suggest if they do it, to try to do it sole operated, because I hate to continually pump energy into something. So that's one idea that we've talked about on the outside. Noise is also important within the house and between the units. So you'll see on the second floor, there's a double-studded wall between the main house and the guest house. So that's there for that reason. Footfall noise from the upstairs to the downstairs is always really difficult. The best way to do it is not put in hardwood floors, put in carpets that are thick and padded. But there is obviously in kitchens and areas you can't do it. And then what we would do is put a hung ceiling with resilient channels in the room below, and that will block the noise from going from one to the other. Not if they do jumping jacks, but anything reasonable. As far as the landscape is concerned, I have clients that really looked into the future. When they bought this lot, they decided that this was a problem. They wanted to mitigate the noise and the view from the highway. And so they planted all these fruit trees up and down the property line, and I think that's great. We're really losing our bee population, and to put in plants where they need to be pollinated, it's a really good idea. Also, trees take a long time to mature. When you first plant them, they don't grow really fast. So the fact that they've been in the ground for quite a few years here, then they'll probably shoot up after this. And so when I did the rendering from the side, from the road, I wasn't sure whether I should show the trees at the height. And then I've been accused when I've done that before that I was trying to hide something on the building. So I tried to walk the medium route where we put the trees a little smaller and a little more transparent than I think they'll actually be. So in closing, if we go back to that rendering that was on the northwest corner, and I just wanted to talk a little bit about aesthetics, which is always there. That's a good one. So it's always hard to. It's a visual thing. So how can I say what's good and bad? But what I wanted to do is have that roof on the first floor echo the roof on the second floor, so I had a pattern going from one floor to the other. And of course, all the other things I said about breaking up the mass by pushing it back. Then we used this kind of gable. It's actually called a Dutch gable. I don't know why, but when the gable is pushed back and the hip goes in front of it. And what I liked about that is it allowed the roof to kind of run through and be united. But then also, if it's just a hip roof, everything looks kind of like so huddled down. The building doesn't have a face. So by starting with the gable that we put over the front door to really draw attention to that, then we copied it on those two bedrooms that are up at the top there. Well, actually, one's a bedroom and a kitchen. And so we have a theme now going through the house. And I was really happy that we were able to carry it over to the front side. And and we've done it so they match, but not precisely, that they go together, but they're not just duplicates of each other. So when you look at the one on the front, on the right, it's the actual wing of the house that it is. And the other ones are slightly different depending where they are. And then there's also one even on the other elevation. And so I think we've got this kind of harmonic theme that goes through the aesthetics of the house. And so that's kind of some of my thinking involved there. Well, I'm sure you'll have questions. I would also say that we put the balcony on the front there to have a focal point. Obviously, the whole front of the house is the garage door. It's a difficult thing to work with aesthetically. So we really wanted to draw up our attention to the gable and the balcony. And from that balcony, my hope is that they can step out and look down Filbert Street towards the ocean and have that kind of connection of the house to the property. And so I would say we also tried to make aesthetically this feel like it belonged in Half Moon Bay and fit on the coast side. So there's my overall views. I know you have questions, so I'll hang around.
Great. Thank you very much. Are there any brief questions of the architect at this time? If not, I'm going to open up the public hearing. Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Go ahead. Sorry.
Sorry, Chris. So I apologize, I may have missed it. I wanted to, in this view, I guess it's the east-facing view, there was a question about the windows and privacy.
Yeah.
I think that-
So first of all, the roof goes through there, so the windows are probably around 3 feet off the floor. The window, if you look at the upstairs floor plan, there's a window in one of the areas that's called a den. The building department could consider that a bedroom. If it's a bedroom, then it has to have legal egress through it. And so I think that window just barely meets egress, that we couldn't change its height, that it had a complication formula that the area has to be over 5.7 square feet, and et cetera, et cetera. And so, but I think that the whole idea was that of the design is we stepped out that second floor so it didn't look down at the neighbors, and that we also reduced the plate heights down to 5'8", down to this height here. I'd hit my head on it. You'd have to really work at it, but then the ceiling raises up. So I think those windows are actually very small. The code also requires us to have light and ventilation in each room. So I don't think, even if you wanted them changed, I don't think the building code will allow you to do it. You'll see the other elevations do have a lot more windows. The window in that gable there that appears to be, the one back, sorry, you're ahead of me. That window's a little higher, and that window is like a clear story window over the stair. So there's no one that can be up in that area and look down into it, and that's the larger of the windows. But we wanted to carry that. So often one side gets treated and all the other facades get to be simple, so we really wanted to try to carry that theme throughout. So I appreciate the question.
Okay, Commissioner Hernandez.
Hi, Chris. Appreciate the project. I think that this demonstrates the benefit of having a professional architect work on a project. I really like the approach you've taken to the parking ingress and egress, the ability to turn in and out. You've really thought through the safety issues there.
I should give also credit to Scott and the city for helping us work through that. I mean, so.
I have two questions. One, I notice, there's a fair number of windows on the western-facing side of the house, which, given the traffic, are probably going to be closed most of the time. So you've got this long tunnel of house and relatively small windows on the eastern-facing side. What have you done to make sure you've got good air circulation moving north to south through the house? Because it can get pretty stuffy on the coast. My concern is
Well,
just...
first of all, I'm sorry.
Yeah, my concern is just you may get pretty stuffy there if most of the windows are going to be closed, especially on the western-facing side.
Well, to the south side is the garage, so I don't really have much to play with there because the garage takes up that part of the facade. But why don't we take a look at the floor plan, and 2.1 is the sheet that the floor plan would be on. And why don't we start with the downstairs? So if you look at the very back of the house, it's the dining room and family room that I'm looking at there. And what we really wanted to do was open the house, have it wrap around the corner here. And you can see that there's sliding glass doors. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of those doors that wrap around that corner. And we wanted to create an outdoor area in the back for the children to play and to barbecue and stuff. But we also wanted to merge it so it wasn't like just a typical backyard that's all in the back. We were able to kind of merge it into that side yard that faces the street and where all the fruit trees are. So we do have good kind of diagonal ventilation going through that area there. And then the kitchen is wide open to it and has 2 windows that'll operate. And let me take a look at the elevations to see how they operate, which would be, if you want to look, A3.1. Yeah, we show in the kitchen slider windows, so that'll be open, and so that'll contribute to the cross ventilation in that whole living area that's there. If I jump to the upstairs, since we've covered the downstairs really, and we go to the bedrooms that are in the very back of the house, I'm with you, Rick, about, first of all, not only the ventilation, but the light. So often bedrooms just have one window on one side of the wall. It doesn't make for any cross ventilation. It doesn't makes for a lot of glare on one side and then a lot of darkness on the other side. So by having windows on both sides there, it'd be nice to have windows on 3 sides, but that would have to be the width of the wing. So both of the bedrooms in the back have cross ventilation through those, and all those windows operate. If we jump over to the front unit, which is the accessory unit that comprises of the den, the kitchen, and the bedroom. If we jump to the bedroom in the front, we have a sliding glass door in the very front of the house, and then we have 2 windows on the side there, so we're actually getting light from 3 sides. The kitchen appears to only have light and ventilation from one side, but in reality there's a window above the stairs, and it's not so far down the stairs that you could operate the window. So we actually have great cross ventilation there. And then the den is very small and only has one window. So both ventilation, light, and are real important, and I think we've solved them in these cases. I realize that not all the information is shown on the plans at this point for you to know how these windows operate, but they all operate.
Thank you, thank you.
Thanks, Chris. That's a very detailed answer.
It's the only way I can do it, unfortunately. Otherwise, it sounds like I'm avoiding something.
No, this is good. I would encourage the applicant to think about ceiling fans as you go through the process. It would probably help. The balcony is 3 foot by 7 foot. Is that?
I think you're right.
So again, why make it so small? Are you
Why
trying
don't we
to
turn
conform
to
with,
once again, that rendering of the front, Scott? Scott, you're a great wingman.
And the reason for my question is just that you've got a fantastic property with a view to the ocean. Down the road, you may want to think about expanding it. It's easier to do it up front rather than do it later. So that's you can't get a lot of furniture on a 3 by 7 patio. So
I appreciate the suggestion. It's come up before in Half Moon Bay of balconies like this, then you're worried about them looking into the neighbor's lot. So you put a larger balcony and you put furniture there, then you have to worry about the neighbor's privacy, the one that's to the east side of this property. So that's one factor that you're just trying to weigh the two. It is kind of a Romeo and Juliet balcony. It isn't meant to really, it's meant that in some ways you can open up the doors and get the ventilation, and so there isn't really room for furniture there. I think aesthetically, I like it kind of recessed into the roof, and if I brought it all the way out to the outer edge, then I think that it would look kind of tall and gangly. So those are the reasons why I did what I did, by be open to making it bigger, but I think those other two concerns are concerns.
you're not trying to conform with the daylight plane or anything like that because you're so far set back on that side of the property. Is that fair?
I think that's exactly fair, but let me take a look. Oh yeah, you're exactly right. I mean, we're we're way beyond that.
I'm not here to like help you design the property. I'm just providing feedback of like
Sure.
something to think about as you go through the final plans and look at this. All right, those are all my questions.
Commissioner Reddick, do you have any questions? Okay, we're going to open up the public hearing. I don't have any speaker cards. Not seeing if anybody does want to speak. Speak now. Nope, we're closing the public hearing. So bringing it back to the commission for discussion and motion if we're ready for that.
So I just want to clarify that I was just reading the ordinance again. If this were a subdivision, you would need to hire that registered professional engineer with all the acoustic experience. Development, including residential, in fact it says particularly residential, needs to respect these standards, but how you approach that is up to you.
I really appreciate that interpretation.
But nevertheless, you're on the hook to achieve those exterior and interior standards. So my
Agreed.
feeling is that they belong in the conditions for the project. With respect to the publicity of, the view to the eastern neighbor, the privacy question, I will defer to my more architecturally competent colleagues. Looking at you, Rick, I appreciated what you were saying about it being set back, and so they're not going to be able to look straight down and see what's going on, 4 feet from the house. I don't know whether it represents something that still needs to be considered. I would imagine light could possibly be available by skylights, but you can't escape a fire through a skylight. So that's up to him, not me. But we aren't having a dialogue here.
Just real quick, I don't want to get into a back and forth, but if you just want to answer that just real quick. That's
Where that balcony would be looking into is basically at the very front of that neighbor's house, and I don't believe they have a lot of windows there, and it's also where their driveway is. So why I mentioned concern about privacy for that neighbor, it may not in this actual case be so important.
Yeah, actually, I wasn't too concerned
What about
about the
the east?
balcony. I was looking at the windows on the south,
Pardon me.
on the
Excuse me.
on the east face of the house toward the north end on the upper story, looking down on the backyard of the eastern neighbor. But again, there are greater architectural minds than mine on this commission who can comment more on that. I'd like to briefly touch the visual resources, the way the condition and evidence, the reso and supporting information was written, as I understand it, reflects the sort of analysis that the city attorney, deputy city attorney presented. It also discusses the conditions in 1837 with respect to upland slope standards. I'd like to think about what her, the proposal that she presented for future analysis treated those, the argument, if I understood it correctly, was that we aren't giving up the authority to control development that impacts the view of features like the eastern slopes, the foothills. We're just doing it in a different way. And I need to digest that. I don't want to kind of take a hip shot and say, yeah, it's right, no, it's wrong. I think it's really important, and we do have Coastal Commission guidance, whether we like it or not, based on the findings in the fire tower study. So I want to give that a little bit of thought, but I think it makes sense in this project to go with the conditions that are parallel to what we discussed while we have a chance to digest this, because I want to be sure we do a good job of protecting it. From my perspective, having the view within the city rather than outside the city means people don't have to drive outside the city to get the view. They stay and they like it here, and maybe they spend a little money here, I don't know. So there are reasons to think about that. But while other commissioners are commenting, I'll go back and have a look at the conditions. I appreciate the fruit trees that have been planted. If they're for bees, I hope you're planning to use what are they, neonics, you know, the kind of herbicides that do damage, and so you want to take the best possible care of those. I don't know if we can condition that, but if that's the goal. Where we can use natives, it would be nice to do that. Obviously, what you've planted has already been planted. If the landscaping plan has done a good job of adapting natives where it can, I'd like that. If it hasn't, no further comments right now.
Are there any other comments from commissioners?
Yeah, my only concern with the project has been the visual resources, and I've been noticing, of course, the story poles for some time. And, you know, it's undeniable that there is a little bit of the eastern ridgeline that is occluded by the story poles. But twice in the last 4 days, I walked the stretch of Highway 1 along the path that's west of the highway from Seymour Street to Kelly. And there are 6 or 8 existing examples of structures, or in some cases, trees that occlude the ridgeline as much or more so. And you know, I'm given the fact that the height of the structure is within the requirements, and that I really believe in the fact that the city's #1 priority is our housing crisis, and a single-family residence and an ADU is a small but important step towards doing something about the housing crisis. That I think that, you know, despite my aesthetic reaction to the story poles, I think it's a good project. I think it doesn't cause any more damage than really exists in that stretch of the highway from Seymour to Kelly today. And it's important for us to put our money where our mouth is when it comes to housing.
Commissioner Hernandez.
I appreciate those comments. I think we have a co-equal responsibility to enforce the Coastal Act as well as meet the need of housing. I think this project does an effective job of doing that. I think the roof line minimizes the impact of the scenic corridor, and the standards that city staff have taken the time to put together in the memo, I think really help us understand why, you know, how this meets it. It's a fleeting obstruction of the ridge line. It's also not a primary beach access street from which we view it. So I appreciate the work that the city staff has put into this. I provided my feedback on the architectural review perspective. I don't have any issues with this project.
Great. Commissioner Polgar?
I also am supportive of the project, and I appreciate the design features. I think that I really appreciate how the facade is very varied. I think it's a really attractive and well done, and I think I share Commissioner Benjamin's kind of, I need to noodle a bit more on the visual, the scenic corridor standards and the application, but I think that in general, but I think that that I am in concurrence with the findings and application for this project. And so, you know, I agree that the impacts are fleeting, you know, the views are fleeting, so I am definitely supportive of the project because I think it's important to have the housing, and I think it conforms to our requirements. It is interesting to read this policy about the sound, and so I do think that, I mean, it's very clear that the city it says shall not approve projects that do not comply with the adopted standards. But I agree with Commissioner Benjamin's interpretation that it's policy 1A, and so it's really kind of up to the applicant to comply with those. Not necessarily, it doesn't specify that an engineer of a certain, you know, qualification. So I think that allows some flexibility, but I don't think that we, as a commission, have flexibility. And then the only other things that I want to just bring up are not comments on the project, but maybe just thoughts for this area, is that I did see, and I appreciated that there was a condition specifying that the applicant would be supportive or work with the city on the East Side Parallel Trail, which I think is really important because we've been wanting as a community to have that. Maybe this is just a question. It looks like this won't constrain that any more than, like, I didn't see where this would cause any constraint on doing that, but I will say that compared with the west side of Highway 1, there's a lot less space, not just from this, like, along this side, this project. There's multiple locations. Is that, how does that affect the ability to do the East Side Trail?
That's a really big question. We agree there doesn't need to be room on this property to support the trail, although there may need to be some connection from whatever kind of frontage is going to ever be on that street to the trail. The crossing of so many streets is a challenge with these trails. You'll note that some of the streets along Highway 1 south of here no longer connect to the highway. So different things may be happening over time with the way East Side Parallel Trail is implemented. I couldn't speculate on what's going to occur here, which is why we had that rather broad approach to that condition. But we do think there's plenty of room. Okay.
Great. And that wasn't an objection or a, suggestion for any change. It's something I was noticing. And then the only other thing is that I will say, and I don't think that this project, based on the drainage, plan, it looked like it had a good approach for dealing with drainage on site. And it doesn't look to me, based on the existing kind of impermeable surface, whether that's actually going to increase the impermeable surface much at all. But I will say that corner at Filbert and Highway 1 floods a lot, not on that side, it's on the south side. So it's just something to watch out for. I don't know if that's something that maybe there's a problem with the water main under. I have no idea what's going on right there, but it's just something to be aware of that could, when you're when you're building it's on the south side, not the side that the property's on.
West side floods a lot too. Yeah. Great, thank you. I'll just say, I think part of the reason why I'm really glad that we're establishing an architectural review board, because I don't think a lot of this conversation should happen at the Planning Commission. This is a single-family home that conforms to code. I think it could have been approved by the Community Development Director. Appreciated bringing it here because of the question around the visual resource stuff. But I do agree with the interpretation that we have here. I think there's trade-offs, and sure, we lose a fleeting view occasionally of a hillside here or there, but there is a need for housing. There's a need for housing in our downtown core, which we've established as a goal in the general plan. And I also appreciate the applicant incorporating an accessory dwelling unit on a relatively small property. I don't agree with the interpretation of the noise element, and I'm actually a little frustrated that you even brought that forward, Jimmy, just because I think that's really clearly established for big projects. It references residential developments, public and quasi-public sort of uses and impacts on those. So to even be suggesting that on a single-family residential home, I think is just really onerous and gets really cumbersome, and sort of just recognizing that staff has a lot of process that they go through in reviewing codes. There's building codes, there's all sorts of processes, and I don't think that that's something that we should be trying to toss in here at the dais at the Planning Commission. So just want to say that, and with that, I'm happy to support the project.
Through the chair.
Absolutely.
So I respectfully disagree with that context. I certainly understand why you'd feel that way, but the noise contours are what the noise contours are, and I don't know how to change that. The health and safety of the citizens who are living in those homes, whether they were built as part of a large subdivision or they're one-off, are just as much at risk. So the underlying intent of the ordinance is independent of whether it's a
But it's
subdivision or a
clearly
one-off.
to regulate the sources of new noise.
Oh, I disagree.
Well, how would, I'm not sure how this applicant would attenuate the noise of Highway 1.
Yeah, this applicant.
They would have absolutely no control over
Yeah,
that.
the noise ordinance has separate sections that deal with noise attenuation from non-transportation sources. But the gist of this part of the noise ordinance is acknowledging transportation sources, both at the time the ordinance was enacted and in the future. So while I appreciate that it represents a challenge in an area that's inside a high noise contour, I don't think we have the authority to waive it. I think that's, with respect, I think it's a reach too far for the noise element.
Through the chair. I think my understanding, and I'd love city staff's feedback on this, is that at the end of the day, for an individual project like this, the onus is on the applicant to make sure they meet the standard, and city staff and the building department, the occupant, the folks who are giving an occupancy permit to make sure that they've met that standard. Is that fair? Is that already expected?
It's fair. On a site like this, it does take extra effort with regards to soundproofing the building. It's very difficult to achieve this in outside space on a site like this, and most noise ordinances or noise elements actually adopt the standards of the Office of Planning and Research for the state, and ours are different than those. In the draft noise element that we were working on, it some time ago, it aligned with OPR, and typically we would have some different kinds of allowances for outside space. For example, noting that you're not going to get that on the frontage, but you could probably achieve it on the other side of the house, so you could have some outside space that conforms, but not the entire property, because that's not realistic. But the other thing we do is we look for soundproofed fencing. It's not 100% helpful, but things that are done are, and I can go into the nits, you can put battens on it, remove all the gaps between fence boards. You can drop a few dB from that. So it's just trimming it down the best that you can. I'm really comfortable that we can handle the interior sound level for the entire building. They are building residential developments smack on Caltrain stations over the hill, and they can conform. So we can deal with that. But I think we should talk about this more in another kind of context around policy. And I'm glad it came up. I'm not prepared. This came up in this way for me tonight, so I didn't do any research in advance of the meeting.
So through the chair, oh, I'm sorry. It looks like Rick had a. So I appreciate that in the culture of large projects, this is a no-brainer for you, and it's more stressful for you in the context of a single project. I don't know how to change the policy, but I will commit to having a conversation about how to tailor it in a way that addresses the concerns that you have, and still protects the public safety. But we have the policies that we have.
Yeah, I would just say we have houses up and down Highway 1 that face on to Highway 1. And I don't see a situation here that's very different. We just approved a project not too long ago at 555 Poplar, very similar, and this wasn't raised. And it just feels like, we're looking for a reason to challenge this project. And I don't think that's a good way to do business. I think if we want to have a policy discussion, I think certainly we can have that separate in a different context when staff is prepared to respond, and when we've been able to have some legal review and we have the information that we need to have an intelligent conversation. But having a printout of one single page of a noise element and raising that at the dais, I don't think is, doesn't feel very professional to me.
So a gentle point of order. Regular order, you should not impugn my motives. I'm not attempting to challenge the project.
Okay.
I'm trying to enforce the general plan and the zoning ordinance.
Just a point of order, we actually, when the project at 555 was brought before the Planning Commission the first time, we did bring up the sound issues, sound attenuation and things like that. They were critical during the original hearing.
Would the chair entertain a motion?
Absolutely.
I move that we approve the resolution next in order with the modification of the addition of a condition to conform with the policies of the noise ordinance, specifically policy 1.A, which gives noise standards for single-family and duplex units.
So we do have a motion. Do we have a second? Okay, so lacking a second, do we have an alternative motion?
I make a motion that we approve the project as recommended by staff.
All those in favor, or do we have a second?
I'll second it.
All those in favor?
Aye.
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 And opposed?
No.
Okay, very good. Moving on to our next, congratulations. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Moving on to our
Oh, yeah, sure.
final items here, we got director's report. Things were-
It was a busy day. All right, thank you. Just want to acknowledge how busy you've been, and we're going to serve up a few more things soon, and I have a little surprise for 3 of you. We would like to have a special meeting on July 30th, if you are able to do so. We have the city attorney available, this Planning Commission Subcommittee for the Land Use Plan. My understanding is you are both available for that meeting. We want to take the Public Works chapter to you that night. We were targeting July 23rd, but that session is filling up because we also need to bring you the zoning study session that we're preparing for, plus we have some timeline associated with the Carter Park plan, and we've got to get it to you in a study session. We have a few key policy questions for you about the Carter Park plan, and we want to get public input on it as well. And it's just it's a lot for us to handle, and it's too much for one meeting. And so just checking in on your July 30th, and let us know. Bridget said yes. Brittany will be here. Sarah's here. I'm here. So you've got staff, and I hope you can do it. I know that's a surprise, though. On August 27th, we're still targeting the bike ped master plan. The initial study and the negative declaration is wrapping up, and that's going to be circulated soon. We have an appeal at Greenbrier, and we also have, we're still targeting, I think, 2804 Champs-Élysées, a proposed new house, and we believe you're all available for August 27th. I have an update on the appeal of the goat grazing permit. The appeal was withdrawn on June 28th, and we have submitted the matter to the Coastal Commission. They have a 10-day call-up, and that will expire next week. I think at the last meeting I let you know that we had completed a delineation. I won't go into it. If you have any questions about the appeal and the amendments to your approval that I approved, let me know. I'll be happy to go through them with you. We are preparing to get the goats and the sheep into town very soon, so that's going to be kind of fun. City Council, I keep plugging it. Next week, Tuesday, Sarah and Bill Lowell are the housing consultant who is working with the community development director in the city manager's office. We will be presenting to City Council regarding the Affordable Housing Fund, some background about community land trusts, a revisit on tenant protection measures. I'm going to provide an overview to them regarding Chapter 2 of the draft land use element, because there's so many housing policy strategies in that chapter. It's not going to be an in-depth presentation on Chapter 2. They can't get ahead of you, but we want them to see how this is all fitting together, and if they have some nudging direction like they have had in the past regarding, for example, the town center boundary, things that we need to bring back to you in your forum. I'm trying to fish those out. So this is a really important meeting. We're also going to show them a series of zoning amendment topics that you are going to be looking at the very next week. They'll get an update on Measure D, which, by the way, all of the certificates for outside the downtown area have been issued so far. There were 24. There are potentially 23 more available to be transferred from the downtown area, which can happen in September pursuant to your allocation code. We're also tracking state legislature that is, I think, this Friday. There's kind of a milestone on whether some of these bills are going to get shoved off to the next session, shelved, or actually proceed through. So we've been really watching that for quite a few crossovers with the city's codes. Community Development Director work, I did approve a project for 689 Silver. It was yesterday. It was an administrative approval. It was a second-story addition. It conformed to every component of the code and had no visual resource or any other concerns regarding that. On July 15th, we have 2 items on Metzger. One's in the 300 block. The other is in the 600 block. One will be administrative, possibly both. The Willing to Serve for the Architectural Advisory Committee was put out through the city clerk's office just a few days ago, and I believe that the recruitment will close at the end of the month. If you know any architects, landscape architects, designers that you think might be interested, just please pass it along to them. I'm going to try to get the word out over to the AIA. The local architect folks, they spread the word quickly. I know we've already received a couple applications. We're excited about meeting with them. You've brought it up again tonight, and I just wanted to note we'll need to have a study session with them once that committee gels and talk about the flow with it. I would not have been comfortable taking Filbert tonight, myself, on Highway 1 in what we have just decided and agreed and feel very comfortable with it being a visual resource area without an architectural advisory committee. And maybe I still wouldn't be comfortable doing that. I still might want it to come to you. So we're going to have to calibrate what that looks like. We're not trying to put an applicant like this through a huge amount of process when they have a project that conforms to every standard. That said, it's highly visible. People ask about it. They want to know. So Friday is that session, the workshop with the League and the Coastal Commission. It will be streamed, short-term rentals, sea level rise, and the local coastal program development process. And I think that's everything I got. If you have any questions, let us know. And Bridget can poll you, or you just please email her about July 30th. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Did you have a question, comment? Okay, any planning commission communications?
Yes. Through the chair. So I just wanted to report for the commission that we had another 4th of July since our last meeting. We had another extensive presentation of informal fireworks, as are wont to happen. And I wanted to invite the Planning Commission to recognize the citizenship of many neighbors in the community who stepped up to help rescue the dogs that were spooked and ran away because of the irresponsible delivery of fireworks. We had a number of citizens from several neighborhoods who got out and walked till well past midnight in response to dogs that were out. And I think some of those people come to our meetings. And because they often are seen as plaintiffs, I think it's really important to recognize them in a role that we might all consider very positive as well.
That's good. I'll just say, and I'll just note, I really appreciated all the work of city staff to get the signage down at Poplar Beach, both the electronic sign and others. I know there was still a lot of incidences of illegal fireworks, but I would say far diminished from what I've seen in past years. And I was actually at a friend's house who fronts right on Railroad there, not necessarily to watch the illegal fireworks show, but certainly if it was there, we might have looked. But we were, didn't really see much of anything. I was out later in the night. I saw other things going on, but it definitely, I think it made a huge difference and a huge improvement, and I've definitely noticed, and Rick and Sarah could probably comment on it better, just the enforcement and the activity that's been going on down at Poplar.
And before we close, I just wanted a question, a point of order, whether we needed to reconsider approval of the minutes. I was rereading the minutes, and it's true that it covered an item that I was recused from, and in our draft minutes, I actually participated in the approval of that item. And I just want to know if you want us to reconsider that and partition it. June 11.
Please, sorry about that. Hang up.
While you sort that out, I'll just echo the comment on the fireworks. The signage was great, and after an 11.5-hour flight on 4th of July, it was really quiet, and it was nice to actually not get woken up with the general tomfoolery that happens in our neighborhood. So, thanks.
I was away on 4th of July because I had to evacuate with my dog to a cabin up in the woods in La Honda because she gets quite psychotic with fireworks. But the next night I was home, and quite late there were industrial strength fireworks going off at the south end of Poplar. I personally called the sheriffs, and the 2 vehicles were there within 90 seconds. So you can't ask for much better responsiveness than that.
Yeah, I appreciate all the good work, and I'm glad things are going well. And I implore the citizens who may be watching to consider the impacts of what is undeniably fun to do and watch on people and animals that don't understand it.
McDonald's. Were those the only 2?
We just had McDonald's and 555
Yeah.
Poplar. You weren't recused. It was the 28th, right?
It was not 555 Poplar, it was the goat.
That was
goat.
the previous meeting.
What I think you're seeing is
The
on the
approval.
first page of the minutes, the approval of the minutes.
Yeah, it was, but I believe at the last meeting, we were going to approve that, and you said there was a lack of a quorum. So we deferred that until this meeting. If you're fine, the chair said we were fine. If you also say we're fine, I'm fine.
You already did that really challenging approval where Chair Holt
Okay.
was out.
Sorry.
Yeah, you got that.
Memory.
I think you're okay.
Senior moment. Thank you.
Okay, so with that, I'll go entertain a motion to adjourn.
I make a motion to adjourn.
In a second?
Second.
All right, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
We'll keep talking.
Yeah, so no attempt to roadblock that project.
No, I know.
We can look at the noise ordinance together. It won't change anything. They're still on the hook.
It just feels so mucky when we start trying to deal with big policy issues.
It should have been dealt with in the original staff report. Yeah.
And I was.
The,
Appreciate Chris's comments about, these folks paying for this and that and this,
Yeah.
and now we got to do this.
yeah, he won't have to, for the safety of his